Hi everyone, if you want to learn about the theory of synchronicity, you're in the right place. The book that I read for my book report is called There Are No Accidents, and it's by Robert Hopcke. Don't know if I said that right, but gave it a shot. The book is written based in the theory of synchronicity, which is a theory that was created by C.G. Jung, a Swiss psychologist. And the book basically defines what synchronicity is, gives various examples of synchronicity in everyday life, discusses synchronicity as it pertains to love, friendship, relationships, life, birth, death, jobs, those kind of things. Just to give you a little bit of a better background into what synchronicity itself is, C.G. Jung defined synchronicity as an unusual sequence of meaningful events. And it's meaningful to the person that's experiencing the event itself. Typically, synchronicity can be considered something that's very subjective because not everybody can see the meaning in the event. It's composed of an inner and an outer portion, or in and outer event, and they are acausally connected. And as I said before, that the event itself has meaning. So there's also 4 components that are prerequisites essentially to an event being synchronistic, and those are that the events are acausally connected, it's not a cause and effect relationship, that the event is accompanied by a deep emotional experience, the event itself is symbolic to the person, like I said, it has some kind of significance to them, and that the event occurs at an important transition in their life and acts as a turning point. So that it creates a change in that individual. The event happens and they have almost like a revelation, and then they decide to change something that they do or how they are, or it just changes something in their life. So the book itself gives various examples. I can't really summarize the book because it's just multiple examples for each category of synchronistic events. So 2 or 3 examples of a synchronistic event that pertains to love or pertains to death, that kind of thing. But to give you a kind of example of something that's a synchronistic event and to make sense of the definition that I had just given you, this is not one that's in the book. This is more of like something that I had personally experienced, or someone close to me has experienced. So last year, a friend of mine passed while surfing, and his family was obviously very distraught because this was a young gentleman and they weren't expecting him to pass so soon. And sometimes his sister sees the letter Z in various places, and the boy's name is Xander. So the outer event is seeing the letter Z, so she looks out of her window and she sees a cloud formation that looks like a Z. That's the outer event. The inner event is her internalizing that and thinking that that's her brother sending her a sign saying that he's there watching over her. And that creates synchronicity to her because there's meaning. She feels like her brother's there with her and that it's a sign that he's watching over her, that he's always with her, and that even though he's not here physically, he's still with her in spirit. And obviously that is something that's very significant and meaningful. And maybe somebody else that looks up at the sky and sees a Z in the clouds, they'll be like, oh, okay, that's cool. But they're not going to see the same meaning. So that's why I say that synchronicity itself can be something that's very subjective. But it occurred at a transitional point in her life. I mean, she was now going away to school and then her brother passed. So something like this is obviously very upsetting and takes a lot out of you. But it elicited a change in her in that she, with the support of her friends and family, have been trying to actively live the kind of lifestyle that they think that Xander embodied. It's just like loving life, enjoying yourself, taking advantage of all opportunities, like being grateful for everything you have, that kind of thing. As well as she also took it upon herself to go and attend CPR and first aid courses so that given the situation that her brother died in arises again, she'll be able to help somebody else. So it elicited a really big change in her life and has been very significant and meaningful for her. So it's also important to consider that, like I said, it's very subjective, and not everybody will see the same meaning in the event that the person that's experiencing it will. And a lot of the time, even the person that's experiencing the event kind of denies or dismisses it, doesn't think that it's actually a sign. They think, oh, it's just a strange coincidence, and they don't see the meaning in it. Whereas there are also people that will look for synchronicity in everything. They try to dig too deep into the meanings or the coincidences, and they just try to make something a synchronicity when it's not. So that's why the importance of the different factors that I discussed before, the prerequisites, that's why that's necessary, along with it, the event itself being meaningful. That's what makes it a synchronistic event. And if you have to try hard to find the meaning in the event, it's likely that it's not synchronistic. Given an example that was actually in the book, there was this story of a female that was away at college. Her father was basically paying her tuition for her, and they had a falling out. The father told the daughter that if she didn't abide by his rules, that he was going to cut her off, and basically that she wasn't going to be able to go to school anymore. So the daughter decided that she wasn't going to be able to abide by these rules that he had set out for her, and he did exactly as he threatened. He withdrew any monetary support that he was providing to her, and she was very distraught because she was wondering how she was going to be able to finish her education, to get a job, to even have somewhere to live, to buy food, that kind of thing, because obviously those are very expensive, and she didn't have a job at the time. So somehow the next day she goes and she meets her friend, and he was just telling her that he was talking to his boss, and the boss had just asked him if he knew anybody that was looking for a job. And basically that seemed like a very strange coincidence. So this is why synchronicity and coincidences can sometimes be confusing. But the friend was able to get her the job, and this was synchronistic to her because she found the meaning in finding the job opportunity in the timing that it occurred, that she was now able to be dependent, and she would still be able to stand by her morals and her beliefs, and she didn't have to compromise who she was just to appease her father and just to basically be paid for doing what he wanted her to do. And she's able to be independent and to support herself, and that it basically taught her to be true to herself, and she took that lesson away from that situation, and she tried to stick to that throughout her life afterwards. There's another dimension of synchronicity to that and meaningfulness to that, because at that point in her education, she wasn't particularly sure what she was going to pursue with her degree or what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. And the job that was then given to her, she actually ended up spending a significant amount of her life doing that as her occupation. So it was synchronistic in that she was unsure of herself at the time, and then she was presented with this opportunity that actually provided her with something that brought her joy and also gave her the money that she needed at the time. So aside from examples and trying to explain synchronicity, there were some very compelling quotes that I found in the book that kind of stuck with me. So one of them would be where the author said, the stories that we make up about ourselves, that we'd like to live, these are not necessarily the ones that we're living or that we are meant to be living. And basically he says this because these synchronistic events kind of put us on track towards the life that we are supposed to be living. So yes, maybe we don't become as successful as we would like to be, or maybe we don't achieve everything we want to be, maybe we have a loss, maybe there's a death. But even though these may be positive or negative effects on our life, they do push us in the right direction of what exactly we are supposed to accomplish with our lives. And at the time it might be sad, or you might question why this is happening to you, but it kind of plays into that quote, everything happens for a reason. And you may not see the reason at the time, but further down the road you'll understand why everything happened the way that it did. The second isn't necessarily a quote per se, but it was just something that he discussed in the book. A component of synchronicity itself is that it needs to elicit some kind of emotion. It needs to have significance, meaning to you. And as a whole, society, they don't feel comfortable expressing emotion or accepting emotion in general. So it's very difficult for these people to find these events synchronistic if they're not willing to accept the way that it makes them feel. And also, it's very difficult for people outside of the experience to understand why the person feels the way they do because they're not accepting of emotions. I mean, not to refer to a stereotype, but people always, in society at least, men shouldn't cry. That's an expectation. So when a synchronistic event happens that elicits that kind of response in a person, people on the outside don't understand why they're crying and it's not okay. And they're just less accepting of the experience itself and therefore less accepting of synchronicity. This assignment was given to us as part of our business class, so it only makes sense that I should discuss how I think I can carry forward the message that was given in this book about synchronicity and just the messages portrayed in the book in general, and how I'm going to be able to apply it to my own practice, to myself as a leader, a manager, a physical therapist, that kind of deal. So, first of all, addressing the whole society not being accepting of emotions, and when I mentioned earlier that some people dig for meaning in things that aren't necessarily meaningful, even if we don't necessarily agree with the person, or even if we don't see the meaning or synchronistic event as the person sees it, we still need to be accommodating of it and understanding and just reassuring. And that's the kind of environment I would want to be if I would want to experience if I was in that situation, and that's the kind of environment I would want to create for my coworkers, for my staff. Anybody that I interact with in a workplace or just in general. That's common courtesy, that's kindness, that's the kind of environment I would want to create. Aside from this, like I said earlier, the quote that really resonated with me, that the stories that make up our lives that we'd like to live are not necessarily the ones that we're living on, that we're meant to live. There's so many people that go through this life and they don't achieve the things that they want to achieve because there have been various events that happen in their life or just unfortunate circumstances that prevented them from achieving what they were hoping to achieve. So I think we also need to be mindful of this and just not take for granted what we are able to achieve, while also just, again, providing that kind of comforting environment for these people that may be feeling like they weren't able to achieve what they wanted to achieve and that they're not living the life that they intended to live. And just show them that that may not have been what they intended, but they're still being sent in the direction that they were supposed to be, that everything happens for a reason and they are where they are because that's where they're supposed to be. I guess the main thing that I took away from the book and from the lessons that it provided me was just being more understanding, being more aware, and then, like I said, I reflected and I know I would want to be in an environment where people are understanding and reassuring and don't dismiss something just because they don't see the meaning in it. So I would want to make sure that I provide that kind of environment for people that may be going through that experience, because we never know what's going on in someone's life, and maybe there's a death in their family that's synchronistic to them, and maybe they're upset, and we don't want to just take that for granted. And lastly, just to be mindful that different people have different interpretations. The same synchronistic event can have different meanings to different people that are involved. And just because it means one thing to you doesn't mean that it'll mean something the same way to somebody else, or that it has less meaning for you or less meaning for somebody else than it does to you. Lastly, I just want to talk about the aspects of the book that I found were maybe the least helpful in portraying the message, or just to me personally. The book itself is very well written. I like the meaning that I was trying to portray, the lessons that I was able to take away from it, and it definitely made me reflect on my own experiences and how those may have been synchronistic when I didn't necessarily think so. I actually ended up finding quite a few scenarios in my life that were synchronistic, and I didn't realize it at the time, and that it's changed the person that I was into the person that I am, and that at the time it may have seemed very upsetting, but it's made me who I am, and I'm happy for it, and I know that I'm going in the direction that I'm supposed to be going in. Maybe it's not how I wanted things to go, but that it's the way things should be. So what I found was the least helpful about the book was basically in one of the areas he discusses synchronicity, and he differentiates it from like psychic or predictions or miracles and that kind of stuff. And he kind of goes into talking about religion and that miracles, he basically dismisses miracles. And I do believe in miracles, so maybe I don't necessarily agree with the statements he was making about religion and miracles. And I just didn't think that that was necessary to go into the religious context. I mean, maybe if it was to back up his point, then it would have made sense, but I don't find that it added anything to his argument, and it just seemed kind of unnecessary. And then the book itself, there were various things that he just kind of repeated throughout the book, and I understand that repetition is a means of making something stick with somebody, but it just became very repetitive and irritating to read, to be honest. But like I said, the book itself was very well written. I appreciate the lessons that I was able to take away from it, and I definitely feel that I'm going to be able to apply it to my life. And I am very satisfied with the book that I chose and the experience that I've gotten out of it.